I never thought much about sleepwalking before Jonah started doing it. I'd heard about kids sleepwalking. Sure, but it was one of those things that sounded more amusing than alarming until it was happening in my own home. At first, I told myself it was just a phase. Kids grow out of things. That's what I kept repeating in my head. The way you do when you don't want to acknowledge the creeping sense that something isn't quite right. Jonah was 8 the first time I found him like that. Still young enough that I told myself it was just a childhood phase, something he'd grow out of. It started subtly. I'd wake up feeling like something had pulled me from sleep, but I wouldn't know why. Then I'd hear the faintest sound, like someone shifting their weight on the floor. I'd glance toward the door, and there he was. Jonah, just standing there in the hallway, shifting from foot to foot, not moving anywhere, not going back to bed, just standing. His eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. That was the worst part. It wasn't like he was asleep or awake. It was like he was somewhere in between, seeing something I couldn't. Sometimes, he muttered under his breath. The words were too slurred, too quiet to make out, like he was talking to someone just out of reach. Other times, he made no sound at all, just breathing, slow, steady, measured in a way that felt almost intentional, like he was waiting. I'd gently take his arm, whisper his name, guide him back to bed. He never resisted, never acknowledged me, and in the morning, he had no memory of it. It was just a phase, I told myself. Strange, but harmless. I believed that for a while. The first time I heard it, I brushed it off as the house settling. Old homes make noise. It's something you get used to. But this sound was different. It wasn't random creaks in the walls or the soft groan of wood shifting in the night. It was steady, rhythmic, almost purposeful, a faint, dragging noise like something thin and light brushing against the surface of the hallway wall. I tried to ignore it. Sleep deprivation does strange things, and by then I had already spent too many nights waking up to check on Jonah. But the sound wouldn't stop. It wasn't loud, just persistent, threading itself into my half-awake brain until I had no choice but to get up. The hallway was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the nightlight from Jonah's room. And there he was, standing in the middle of the hallway, his small frame motionless except for his fingers. He was tracing them along the wall in slow, deliberate strokes, his forehead pressed lightly against it. Not banging, not pushing, just shifting ever so slightly, like he was testing something. I watched for a moment, my skin prickling. The movement was too controlled to be aimless, too smooth to be accidental. His fingers barely made a sound, but now that I was closer, I could hear his breathing deep, even, completely detached from reality. I whispered his name. Nothing. No flicker of recognition, no break in his movement, just the slow, rhythmic shift of his weight, the barely there scrape of his fingertips against the wall. I reached out, hesitating for only a second before placing a hand on his shoulder. He stopped. Not gradually, not with a start, just stopped, like something had cut a string inside him. Then, after a beat, he blinked. His gaze cleared, and for the briefest moment, he looked lost, confused, like he had just woken up somewhere unfamiliar. Without a word, he let me turn him around and guide him back to bed. I tucked him in, stood there for a few extra seconds, just to be sure, then walked back to my room. I told myself it was normal, that sleepwalkers do strange things. But the unease in my chest lingered long after I laid back down, long after the house was silent again. Something about it was wrong. I just didn't know why yet. Years passed. Jonah grew out of his sleepwalking, and life moved on. I barely thought about those nights anymore. That's the thing about unsettling memories. You don't realize how much you've pushed them down until something drags them back up. The first time I found Ezra standing in the hallway, I didn't react at first. It was late. I was exhausted. And for a split second, my half-asleep brain thought I was looking at Jonah again. Years younger. But no, Ezra was standing there, shifting from foot to foot, his small frame swaying slightly. Something cold settled in my stomach. I watched him for a moment, waiting for some sign that this was different. But no, he moved the same way, slow, absent, like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. His head tilted ever so slightly, his fingers twitching at his sides. The same empty, unfocused stare. It had to be a coincidence. Genetics, maybe. Kids repeat things they don't even understand all the time. That's what I told myself as I gently turned him around and guided him back to bed. It's what I told myself every time I found him wandering after that. Then one night, I woke up to a sound I hadn't heard in years. Scraping, a faint, dragging noise against the hallway wall. My pulse quickened, a feeling of deep, immediate dread washing over me. It wasn't possible. That was over. But before I even stepped out of bed, I already knew. I knew exactly what I would see, and I was right. Ezra stopped sleepwalking eventually, just like Jonah had. No more eerie hallway encounters, no more quiet tapping sounds in the night. I told myself that was the end of it. Kids go through phases. That's all it ever was, and I should have let it go. I really should have. But then we decided to renovate the house. It wasn't anything major, just small changes. A fresh coat of paint, refinishing the floors, and finally stripping off the old wallpaper in the hallway. The paper had been there since we moved in, a faded floral pattern that always felt a little outdated, but I never thought much about what was underneath. I should have. The first tier was unremarkable, just drywall and adhesive residue. But as we peeled back more, something else began to emerge. A reflection, a sheen where there shouldn't have been one. And then, all at once, we saw it. A mirror, built directly into the wall, seamlessly blended in, as if it had been part of the house itself. But it had been covered, sealed beneath layers of wallpaper, hidden like someone had deliberately tried to erase it. I stepped closer, staring at my own reflection, but I wasn't looking at myself. I was looking at the placement of it, the exact spot, the very wall where both my sons had pressed their foreheads in their sleep, night after night. I didn't know what to think. A mirror shouldn't mean anything. It was just glass, just an old design choice someone decided to cover up, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to find it. A few days after we uncovered the mirror, I brought it up to Mrs. Calloway, our neighbor. She'd lived on this street longer than anyone, long enough to remember who had lived in our house before us, maybe even before them. I wasn't expecting much, just casual conversation. But the second I mentioned it, something in her changed. She went still, her hands pausing over the fabric of her skirt, her mouth pressed into a thin line. It was subtle, but I saw it, like I had said something I shouldn't have. For a moment, she didn't respond. The silence stretched, and I found myself filling it, rambling about how strange it was to find a mirror built into the wall like that, how someone had deliberately covered it up, hidden it. She let out this short, clipped breath, something between a scoff and a sigh, not disbelief, something else, a kind of resignation maybe, like she had already known what I was going to say. Then, barely above a whisper, she muttered something. Just a few words, but they sent a shiver down my spine. Something about how some things were better left alone. I asked her what she meant, but she only shook her head. I thought about pressing her, pushing for an answer, but the way she looked at me made me stop. There was something final in it, something that made me feel like I didn't actually want to know. I couldn't keep it there. It wasn't even about the boys sleepwalking anymore, at least that's what I told myself. It was just a mirror. Just an old, forgotten thing that had been part of the house long before we moved in. But the fact that someone had gone through the trouble of hiding it, sealing it away beneath layers of wallpaper, that stuck with me. That didn't feel like an accident. At first, I tried to ignore it, told myself I was being ridiculous. I wasn't the kind of person who believed in superstitions, and I wasn't about to start now. But every time I walked past it, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet unease that settled deep in my stomach. I made up my mind one afternoon, while the house was empty. I took a hammer and pried it loose, trying not to think about how easily it came free, like it had been waiting to be removed. I didn't let myself hesitate. I hauled it out to the garage, out of sight, out of the house. For a few minutes I felt relief, like I had done something right. But then I stepped back into the hallway, and I realized it didn't feel better. It felt wrong in a different way, like the space was too empty now, but not in a good way. I told myself I had fixed whatever it was, that I had done the right thing, that whatever strange feeling had settled into our house would finally pass. But even as I stood there, staring at the blank wall where the mirror used to be, I couldn't shake the thought creeping into the back of my mind. What if I had just made it worse? Jonah and Ezra are grown now. They're off living their own lives, away at college, far from this house and everything that happened here. It should bring me comfort. It does, in a way. The house is quieter than it's ever been. No footsteps in the hallway. No restless shifting in the dark. No faint muttering from just beyond my bedroom door. And yet sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night without knowing why. Some old instinct kicking in, pulling me out of sleep. I lie there, staring at the ceiling, listening to nothing at all. I tell myself it's over, that whatever it was, if it was anything at all, is gone now. I even let myself believe it. Most days, but every now and then, I catch myself lingering in the hallway, my eyes drifting to that empty stretch of wall. It's just a wall, that's all it is. And yet I remember the way they used to stand there, pressed against it, unmoving. I remember the slow, rhythmic scraping of fingers against wallpaper. I remember the mirror, the way it had been hidden, and I remember how it felt after I took it down, like I had changed something but not necessarily for the better. I tell myself it's just an old habit, that I'll grow out of it eventually. But even now, after all these years, I still listen, just in case. The move had been for Ethan. A fresh start, a new school, a chance to leave everything behind and begin again. That's what I told myself. That's what I told him. And for a while it seemed to be true. He settled in quickly, quicker than I expected. He wasn't just doing well, he was thriving. Making friends, bringing home drawings filled with bright colors, humming to himself while putting away his books. Little things that reassured me, things that made me believe, just for a moment, that maybe everything really would be okay. So when the school called, I wasn't prepared. It was the secretary. Her voice was even polite, but there was something else underneath it, something just a little too careful. She told me there had been an incident involving Ethan and another student, Leo. They needed me to come in. That was all she said. No details, no explanation. Just that my son had been involved and that I should get there as soon as possible. My stomach twisted. I wanted to ask questions, wanted to push for answers. But something in her tone made me stop. It wasn't just concern. It wasn't even disappointment. It was something heavier, something uncertain, and for the first time since the move, doubt crept in. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Kids get into trouble, it happens. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Ethan had been caught up in something without realizing it. He wasn't the type to pick fights. If anything, he avoided conflict. That much I knew. But as I drove to the school, hands tightening around the wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an ordinary call, that whatever had happened, whatever I was about to walk into, was something I wasn't prepared for. The principal sat across from me, his expression carefully neutral. But there was something in his posture, something measured, almost hesitant. He explained what had happened. Ethan had thrown an eraser at Leo, not just a careless toss, but hard enough to send the boy backward, hard enough to make him cry out. The words didn't sit right. Ethan wasn't like that. He had never been the type to lash out, never had those sudden outbursts some kids did. If anything, he was too cautious, too soft-hearted. The kind of child who apologized even when it wasn't his fault, who hesitated before stepping on cracks in the sidewalk, who always looked to me for reassurance before making a decision. Trying to picture him hurling something in anger, enough to hurt another kid, felt impossible. I turned to him, waiting for some kind of explanation. He wouldn't look up. His hands were balled into fists in his lap, his shoulders drawn in tight. There was no flicker of protest, no attempt to explain himself, just silence. A silence that made my stomach knot. The principal kept talking, something about how they weren't going to punish him but wanted to understand what had happened. I barely heard the words. My attention was on Ethan, on the way he shrank into himself. Something wasn't right. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, he finally spoke. Sitting on the edge of his bed, his legs curled close to his chest, he admitted what had really happened. Leo had told him to do it, said it was part of a game. But after Ethan did, everything changed. The way Leo looked at him, the words he whispered, the weight of the moment. None of it had felt like a game at all. Ethan wouldn't say more, just that he had to go along with it, that if he didn't, something worse would happen. The way he said it sent a chill through me. Kids made up stories all the time, but this wasn't just a story. I could hear it in his voice. This was fear, real, unshakable fear, and I had no idea what to do with it. I expected pushback. Parents don't like hearing that their child was involved in something troubling, especially when another kid gets hurt. So when I called Leo's mother, Claire, I braced myself for the usual reactions, defensiveness, maybe even outright denial. I expected her to insist that Leo would never do something like that it must have been a misunderstanding, that maybe Ethan was exaggerating. Instead, she was calm. Too calm. She listened carefully, letting me explain everything, but her response was strangely measured. No real surprise, no concern, no defensiveness, just quiet acknowledgement, like she had already heard this before, like she had been waiting for this call. She agreed that it was odd, Ethan lashing out, Leo's unsettling reaction afterward, but she dismissed it so easily. She said Leo had a wild imagination, that he struggled with social cues, that sometimes he just got too caught up in his own little world. It wasn't unusual, she told me, for him to take games too far. It should have reassured me. It didn't. The conversation didn't feel like one between two worried parents trying to make sense of their children's behavior. It felt scripted. Every answer came too quickly, too smoothly, like she had rehearsed them in her head before I even called. She never asked me any questions. She never even hesitated. Then she suggested something I didn't expect. A sleepover. She said it so casually, like it was the most natural solution in the world. Maybe the boys just needed more time together, away from school, away from adults watching over them. Maybe that would help them sort things out. Maybe Leo just needed a friend who understood him, someone who could pull him back when he got too deep into his own strange games. I should have said no. Every part of me wanted to. The whole conversation felt off. The way she spoke like this was already decided, like she had already worked through every possible scenario, and landed on this as the only answer. And maybe that's what caught me off guard the most. How easy it was to just agree. The moment we stepped inside, I knew something was off. Claire was warm, welcoming, every bit the picture of a polite and gracious host. But the house itself, something about it felt wrong, not in any obvious way. It wasn't dirty, wasn't in disrepair. It was just off. The air was stale, like the windows hadn't been opened in years. The lights were warm but didn't seem to reach the corners of the rooms, leaving odd little patches of shadow where there shouldn't have been any. And underneath it all there was a heaviness, something pressing down on my skin, making me feel like I had to move carefully, like I wasn't supposed to be here. Ethan clung to my side as we moved through the house, taking it all in. The furniture was nice, too nice, like it had been set up to impress someone who never showed up. But the walls were bare. No family photos, no messy bulletin boards filled with reminders and shopping lists. Nothing that made it feel like a home. As Claire led us toward the basement, Ethan hesitated. His attention had locked onto something in the hallway. A door. It was different from the others. Heavy, reinforced, and more importantly, padlocked. He didn't say anything at first, just pointed, and I could feel his unease in the way his fingers curled slightly, like he wanted to pull his hand back. Claire answered before I could even ask. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. Just storage. Too fast. Too final. Ethan didn't look at her. He looked at Leo, and that's when I saw it. Leo flinching, a tiny involuntary reaction that vanished almost as soon as it appeared, like he had been caught doing something he wasn't supposed to, or like he was afraid. When I arrived the next morning, Ethan was already standing by the door. His backpack was slung over his shoulder, shoes on, jacket zipped. He didn't look at me when I walked in, just stared straight ahead like he had been waiting for this moment all night. Claire was all smiles, talking about how much fun they'd had, how the boys got along so well. But Ethan, he didn't say a word, not a single goodbye to Leo, just walked straight to the car, climbed in and buckled his seatbelt before I even had the chance to close the door. We drove in silence for a while. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, waiting for him to say something. He just stared out the window, hands pressed between his knees. Then finally his voice came, small, careful, like he wasn't sure if he should even say it out loud. He had woken up in the middle of the night. At first he didn't know why, just a strange awareness pulling him out of sleep. But then he heard it. A sound so soft it barely registered at first. A tapping, rhythmic, deliberate, not random. Someone or something testing for a response. He told himself it was Leo, playing a joke. That was the only thing that made sense. But then the whisper came. A voice too low to recognize, too close to ignore. It wasn't Leo. He had buried himself under the blankets, heart pounding, squeezing his eyes shut like that would make it go away. But before he did, he saw one last thing. The padlock was still in place. But the door was open. Ethan hadn't told me everything at first. I could tell there was more, something he wasn't sure how to explain, or maybe something he didn't even want to admit to himself. It wasn't until later that it came out bit by bit, like he was testing how much of it I would believe. He had woken up again, sometime deep in the night. The air in the room felt different, heavier, like the weight of something unseen was pressing down on him. He didn't know what pulled him from sleep this time. No tapping, no voice. But as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he noticed something. A glow, faint, flickering, candlelight. The bathroom door was open just enough for him to see inside. Leo stood there, facing the mirror, his face half lit by the wavering flames. His lips moved, murmuring something too low to hear. Ethan almost called his name. Almost. But something about the way Leo was standing, so stiff, so still, made him stop. Then he heard it. Not just a name, but a name Leo should never have been saying. He wasn't calling himself Leo. He kept repeating another name, over and over, in a voice that didn't sound entirely like his own. Mr. Ellis. Ethan swore the voice changed as he listened, high, then low, as if two people were speaking in unison, overlapping in a way that didn't make sense. His breath caught in his throat. He wanted to look away, to close his eyes and pretend he hadn't seen anything. But before he could, the candle flickered, stretched unnaturally against the walls. Then everything went black. The whispering didn't stop. It didn't fade. It only moved. Closer. Above him. I hesitated too long. Looking back, I can see all the moments where I should have acted. Where I should have pulled Ethan out, demanded answers, done something. But at the time, it was easier to reason it away. Maybe Leo was just a strange kid. Maybe Claire was just an odd parent. Maybe I was overthinking things, twisting them into something they weren't. Then Monday came and the school sent out a vague, cautious email. An incident had occurred. That was the only word they used. Incident. No names, no details. Just a polished corporate reassurance that everything was being handled and that there was no cause for alarm. But parents talk. What I heard in the school parking lot that morning made my stomach turn. Leo had attacked another student. Not just a shove. Not a harmless fight between kids. Something worse. The kind of thing that had teachers exchanging glances, pulling kids aside, murmuring in hushed voices. No one knew exactly what had happened, or if they did, they weren't saying. But the few details that slipped through were enough. There was blood, there was screaming, and there was fear. I tried calling Claire, straight to voicemail. The next time I dialed, the number was disconnected. I could have stopped there. I could have told myself it wasn't my business. But the unease had sunk its claws into me, and I couldn't shake it. So I got in my car and drove to their house. It was empty, but not in a way that made sense. No moving boxes, no signs of packing, no furniture left behind or garbage bags sitting on the curb. The curtains still hung in the windows, but when I peeked inside, the rooms were hollow and untouched, coated in a thin layer of dust, as if no one had stepped inside for weeks, as if they had never been there at all. I checked with the neighbors, but no one had seen them leave. No moving truck, no late-night packing. Just one day there, the next day gone. No forwarding address, no trace. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. because I still think about that house. The locked door, the way Claire had answered too quickly when Ethan asked about it, the way Leo had flinched, and that name, Mr. Ellis. I don't know why Leo called himself that. I don't know why his voice had shifted in that dim bathroom mirror, or why Ethan had woken up to something tapping, whispering. I don't know what was behind that door, but I do know one thing. Ethan never opened it, and I can't stop wondering what would have happened if he had. I used to have nightmares often. Stress, maybe, or something deeper, something my mind couldn't quite untangle. It wasn't unusual for me to wake up in a cold sweat, my pulse hammering, my body stiff with a fear I couldn't explain. Most of the time I could shake it off, tell myself it was just another bad dream. But this one was different. This one never faded. In the dream I was in bed, half asleep, when my mother came storming in. The door flew open so hard it rattled against the wall. I barely had time to react before she grabbed my wrist, hard fingers digging in. She was shaking me, and her face, it wasn't hers. I mean it was, but something was wrong. Her expression twisted, furious, her eyes wild and empty, like she was looking right through me. I could hear her voice, low and harsh, but I don't remember the words, just the feeling, the sheer terror of it. I woke up gasping, my sheets damp with sweat, my heart still racing. But before I could catch my breath, before I could even sit up, it happened. The door slammed open. My mother stood there, same rage, same grip on my wrist, same words. I don't remember how it ended, just that I barely managed to push her off, that at some point she left as suddenly as she'd come. The next morning, I brought it up. She just stared at me, blinking, confused. No memory of it, not even a flicker of recognition in her face. I wanted to believe her. Maybe I was dreaming the whole thing, but the way my body tensed up when she walked into the kitchen told me otherwise. There was something about the house at night that never felt right. I told myself it was just childhood paranoia, that every creak and whisper of the old floorboards was normal. But even now, when I think about it, my stomach knots the same way it did back then. Like my body knew something I refused to acknowledge. The footsteps were always the worst part. Slow, uneven, always in the hallway just outside my room. I used to think I was imagining them, but they were too deliberate, too heavy to be my mother's, too steady to be the house settling. Sometimes I'd call out, expecting her voice to answer from down the hall, but there was only silence. Other times I'd force myself to look, pressing my face against the mattress and peeking through the crack of my door. Nothing, always nothing. But one night they stopped right in front of my door, not moving, not retreating, just standing there, listening. I held my breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. Then a knock, not loud, not frantic, just soft, expectant, like someone testing if I was awake. I didn't sleep that night. I lay stiff under my blankets, staring at the ceiling, until the first slivers of daylight crept through my window. The next morning I brought it up casually over breakfast, like it hadn't left me shaking in my bed for hours. My mother barely looked up from her plate. "I thought that was you," she said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. I don't know why that scared me more than anything else. She had always been terrified of dogs. It wasn't just discomfort, it was real, visceral fear. She'd cross the street if she saw one, recoil at the sound of barking, even tense up at a dog on TV. It was one of those things about her that never changed, no matter what else did. At least, that's what I thought. That afternoon, I heard laughter outside. Not the kind that felt normal. It was too sharp, too high-pitched, almost frantic. It sent a chill through me before I even knew why. When I stepped into the backyard, I froze. She was crouched near the fence, letting a stray dog lick her fingers. A big one, the kind she usually wouldn't even be near long enough to scream about. But she wasn't scared. She wasn't even hesitant. Her face was calm, almost serene, and she was whispering. Not to the dog, to something. I couldn't make out the words, but the rhythm of it was strange. Too steady, too practiced. It wasn't the way people normally talk. It was the way people respond. I called her name. She turned too slowly, like she had to remember how. For a second, her face was completely blank, nothing there at all, and then she smiled. Wide, too wide. It felt like a mask slipping into place. I asked her what she was doing, but she just kept staring at me, tilting her head, like I had said something ridiculous, like I was the one acting strange. That night, I brought it up again, trying to laugh it off. She barely looked up from the sink, just waved a hand, said it never happened, said I must have been dreaming. I wanted to believe her. I really did. I never liked walking past her room at night. There was something about the way the door was always just slightly open, the sliver of darkness beyond it stretching too deep. I usually hurried by, eyes fixed straight ahead, pretending there was nothing to see. But that night, I looked. She was sitting at her vanity, staring into the mirror, perfectly still. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The dim light cast long shadows across her face, stretching her expression in ways that didn't feel right. I should have kept walking. I should have pretended I hadn't seen anything. But my feet carried me closer, slow and silent, until I could see more clearly. She wasn't talking to herself. She was listening and answering. Something in me locked up, a primal instinct screaming that I wasn't supposed to be seeing this. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I whispered her name. She stiffened, not like someone who had been startled, but like something had just changed. She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge me, just kept looking at herself. And then she smiled, small at first, then wider, like someone had told her something funny, something only she could hear. I don't remember backing away, but suddenly, I was in the hallway again, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I tried to bring it up, throwing it out casually like a joke. She laughed, but something about it was off. Her eyes weren't amused. They weren't anything at all. I never mentioned it again. The church was supposed to be safe. That was the whole point. A night away, surrounded by normalcy, people who didn't make me second-guess my own memories. A lock-in with my youth group, tucked inside a place where nothing strange could reach me. I should have felt relieved. At around 2 in the morning, the knocking started. At first, it was dull, almost unremarkable, a steady tap against the chapel walls. But then it moved. Fast, erratic. One moment it was by the front doors, then suddenly along the side of the building, the back entrance, the windows. It circled us, pressing in from all sides. I wanted to believe it was the wind, maybe an animal, but it wasn't. The pattern was too deliberate, too knowing, and sometimes it came from 2 places at once. I woke the youth pastor. My voice barely sounded like mine when I told him someone was outside. He followed me to the chapel doors, groggy, unconcerned, until he wasn't. When he opened the doors, I watched his entire body stiffen. He actually took a step back. My mother was standing there, barefoot, in the freezing cold. Her clothes were wrinkled, clinging to her skin like she had been sweating. Her hair hung damp against her face. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. She didn't acknowledge the pastor. She didn't acknowledge anyone. She locked eyes with me, and then she smiled, slow, like she had just found something she had been looking for. The drive home was silent. No questions, no explanations, just the hum of the tires on the road, the dim glow of passing streetlights flickering across her face. I don't know why I got into the car. I don't know why I didn't tell her to leave. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, like there was no other option. When we pulled into the driveway, she didn't move at first, just sat there, hands resting too still on the wheel. When she finally stepped out, she paused in the doorway, staring at me like she was about to say something. But she didn't. She just stood there, watching. I locked my bedroom door that night, listened to every creak of the house, settling every soft shift of movement down the hall. Eventually exhaustion won out, but my dreams were uneasy. Flashes of something I couldn't hold on to, slipping away the moment I opened my eyes. The next morning, she was in the kitchen, humming, cheerful, acting like everything was normal. I asked why she had come to the church. She laughed, like I had said something ridiculous, and told me she had been just about to leave to pick me up. She wasn't joking, she meant it. I tried to process what that meant. If she hadn't driven to the church, then how did I get home? Later I waited for the pastor or someone to say something, to acknowledge what had happened, but no one did. They didn't even glance at me like anything was strange. It was like they had chosen to forget. And maybe I should have too. She's gone now. Has been for a while, but I can't let go of those memories. They surface at the oddest moments, quiet nights, empty rooms, in between seconds, where my mind has nothing better to latch onto. I try to rationalize it all. I tell myself it was mental illness. I tell myself it was addiction, exhaustion, stress, anything that makes sense, anything that keeps it grounded in reality. But some things still sit wrong in my head. The way her expression would shift so suddenly, like someone flipping a switch. The things she did that contradicted everything about her. The eerie lack of memory afterward, as if the moments that unsettled me the most had never even existed for her. I've spent years trying to convince myself there's an explanation for all of it, and maybe there is. Maybe I was just a kid in a house filled with shadows, turning them into something more than they were. Maybe I was so desperate to make sense of her that I started seeing patterns where there weren't any. But even now, I don't know if I believe that. Because sometimes, late at night, I remember the way she smiled at me outside that church. That slow, knowing smile. The way she locked eyes with me, like she had finally found something she had been waiting for. And I wonder if she knew something I didn't.